My name is Nicolas Buhmann and I work as commercial manager for the TRADELENS project. Now the TRADELENS project, of course, as some of you might already know, a joint project between Maersk and IBM. And I know that some of you I've already met in the past and you're probably familiar with the project, so I'll split this presentation in two parts. First part, of course, I do want to give a brief introduction into what it is, but also then share a bit of the recent developments in the second part and tell you what has happened over the last 12 months or so. So looking at the overall developments of TRADELENS, you perhaps have quite recently seen in the press that we have achieved a very important milestone for our project. Just a few weeks ago, we were able to announce that also shipping lines MSC and CMA, and 2 weeks later, Hapag-Lloyd and ONE have now decided to join the TRADELENS platform. Now this is an important milestone for us because we've always said that TRADELENS is a neutral platform and it's more than just a Maersk system. And the fact that these other shipping lines have now decided to also join this network really proves that point. So together with the other shipping lines, we'll then be able to cover close to 60% of the global container traffic. But of course, also important to highlight that these two milestones are not really the beginning of our journey, but they were following development of approximately 2 or 3 years. Because 2 or 3 years ago was when we had the initial idea about TRADELENS. And back then, perhaps you also know, this whole idea of TRADELENS actually started as research. Research that was conducted together with the European Union. The European Union back then had a research project called CORE, the CORE Research Project. And essentially CORE was trying to figure out how the WTO safe framework of standards can be applied in a European context. And one of the working groups, working group number 23, was the working group in which Maersk, together with IBM, together with the Customs Administration of the Netherlands, and together with the Technical University in Delft, which was our academic research partner. We were in this working group and we were trying to understand how a so-called shipping information pipeline, so essentially one place where all the information pertaining to the shipment of a container can be stored and made accessible to the other involved parties. We're trying to understand how such a shipping information pipeline would help to make trade more secure and at the same time also facilitate trade. Now, as part of this research, we first wanted to understand how complex global trade actually is. And I mean, after hearing so many presentations today, I'm sure it's quite clear that the complexities in global trade are evident. The specific use case that we were looking at was a shipment of avocados coming from Kenya to the Netherlands. And one of my colleagues, he flew to Kenya and he rented a car. He was driving behind this container of avocados to understand how many different companies are involved, how many different people are working on this container, and how many information exchanges are required. So then writing all of that down, he later summed it up and he calculated that in order to make just this one single container of avocados move, it involved 30 different organizations. It involved more than 100 different people, and information was being exchanged more than 200 times. So there's a lot of administrative complexity, which, and that won't surprise you, also results in a lot of cost. And the reality today is that in many shipments, the administrative cost of moving a container is actually higher than the cost of physically moving that container. So again, administrative cost higher than cost of physically moving that container. And that's essentially the business case behind this TRADELENS project. So we took this research then and we tried to sort of categorize the different inefficiencies that we see. And another very interesting phenomenon, and I think it was briefly already mentioned earlier today, is that in global trade today, data generally speaking, is available. Data is everywhere. We all generate data. The issue is that this data is typically stuck within organizational silos because nobody shares all of the data. Well, and the reason for why we don't share data is it's actually twofold. Firstly, of course, there are concerns about privacy and so on, and it seems to be that there's a bit of a reflex, right? When people say, hey, are you willing to share your data? Then by reflex we always say, oh, no. But it's probably better to first understand what kind of data we're even talking about, because the reality is that much of the data that we consider private is already available. It is out there somewhere, and you can access it. I'll give you one example. Pretty much every terminal around the world nowadays has a website. And on this website, you can typically find a small field in which you can put in a container number. And then this website is quite readily going to tell you all the information that this terminal has for the container. When was it discharged? Has it gated out already? All of that information. So it is there, you can access it, but the issue is, of course, no global company wants to check the websites of 600 different terminals for thousands of their containers every 5 minutes just to get the latest status. So information is there, but it's being fragmented and it's not being shared. And the reason for why this information is not being shared in a more efficient way via connections, for example, is because it's not so easy to share information. Yeah? In our industry, we typically do that by setting up EDI connections. And as you know, that's a rather complex and also costly way of connecting systems. The port community systems are a great solution to take some of that complexity out. But then again, you end up with 500 different port community systems that you would have to connect to for global coverage. So our ambition here really is to take a global stance on this transparency and visibility. And we say we want to connect more than just the port ecosystem. We truly want to connect the entire globe. All the different customs, all the different ports, all the different terminals, all the different shipping lines, freight forwarders, importers, exporters, truckers, barge operators. So really anyone who in some way or form is involved in global trade, in the shipment of a container, can connect to this platform and exchange data through it. Now the way that this looks and works, I can explain to you with this slide. If you look at the top here, you will find a rather generic supply chain with the exporter on the left, and then on the right side you have the importer. Then along the journey of this container you will have your freight forwarder or third-party logistics provider, you'll have your trucker, your customs or other governmental authorities like sanitary, for example. You have your ports and terminals in the middle of the shipping line, and then the same mirrored again on the importing side. Now, along the entire journey of the container, different data is generated. Typically, this could start with a booking being created, then the empty container being picked up, then the container delivered to the warehouse, container stuffed, container loaded back on the truck brings it to the terminal, gate in, load, and so on. So these kind of milestones and events. The other part of the data are documents. Now, in order to make containers move today, documents are required. Bill of lading, commercial invoice, packing list, certificate of origin. And in many cases, these documents are paper-based, and they are in different parts of the world. So here the idea of the TRADELENS platform also is to digitize those documents and make them available in one space. And this is also where we use blockchain technology. Now, what happens is that when you upload a document to TRADELENS, we take the hash key of this document. Now, the hash key is something like a unique fingerprint. It allows us to identify uniquely any file. And if somebody were to make changes to this file, for example, Photoshop a 0 into a 1, then this would result in a completely different hash key. And we could see, all right, something has changed with the document, it's not the same anymore. So this hash key is stored on the blockchain. And once it is stored on the blockchain, thanks to the specific security mechanisms of blockchain, it can't be changed anymore. Now, all the other organizations or authorities later in the process that also have to look at the same document, they have the mathematic and cryptographic guarantee, thanks to the blockchain, that they are still looking at the same document, and that all the other parties or authorities before them in the process, who perhaps have stamped it or signed the document, have indeed done that. So better security, and at the same time also a more streamlined process. Now, whenever we talk about a platform, I think the technical part of it is actually the simple, or the part that is easier to develop and achieve. The real value, however, comes from the network. And that applies to any platform. The real benefit, the real value comes from the network. And it's the same like with WhatsApp or Facebook or Yandex or whatever platform you use. It really all depends on who the users of this network are. So who are the users of TRADELENS? And over the last, I'd say 1.5 or 2 years, since we've went into the limited availability of this platform, we have actually come quite a long way. And today, since I think a bit more, 11 months or so, I think 11 months ago we launched TRADELENS openly, publicly in production, open to everyone. And by now we have connected, well actually that number is a bit higher, I just checked earlier today, and it's 72 ports and terminals around the world that are already today directly connected to the TRADELENS platform. And from all of these ports and terminals, we receive live in real time data of containers that are moving through the physical infrastructure. Now, that's already great to have so many ports and terminals connected, but of course there are many more around the world. And the great news is that from those other ports and terminals, we also get the data. They're not directly connected to TRADELENS, but via some of the other network members, like the shipping lines, we do receive their data. So we have for more than 600 ports and terminals around the world already today the data on the TRADELENS platform. This is a list of, okay, it's difficult to see, but I think we'll share the presentation later. This is just the list of all the ports and terminals that are already today directly connected to TRADELENS to exchange the data. But of course, ports and terminals is just one category. The ocean carriers are another very important category. And as you know, Maersk Line started this together with IBM, and then other carriers within the Maersk group like Hamburg Süd or Sealand are also part of this. But then shortly after also ZIM or Pacific International Lines, the Singaporean-based carrier, decided to join. We also have a few smaller short sea operators like Unifeeder, they have joined the network, or in Asia, Namsung, or like Boluda in Spain. And as I mentioned also recently, MSC, CMA, Hapag-Lloyd and ONE decided to join. Now they are currently in the process of being integrated to the platform. And since many shipping lines have rather complex IT systems, it's a process that takes them a few weeks or perhaps months. But we do expect that by the end of this year we'll complete the integration of those shipping lines, and by then we'll cover the aforementioned 60% of global container traffic. Now, in the 3PL and intermodal space, we're also closely working together with a few of the freight forwarders, like Agility was one of the first ones to join. It's also fair to say that our focus thus far has mostly been on ports and terminals, but now since some time we've also put increased focus on developing the ecosystem around that, meaning trucks, meaning rails, meaning barge operators. So this is also growing. And of course, also very important for us, because it's an integral part of any supply chain, are the different authorities. Dutch Customs, as I mentioned, was the first one to join us during the core research project. They actually invited US Customs and Border Protection to also join. They are now actively investigating the use of TRADELENS data. I mean, it's important to also point out that TRADELENS is not a customs system per se. TRADELENS is a system developed by the private companies in an effort to streamline their operations and work together in a more efficient way. But as the private companies upload their data to TRADELENS, of course it also becomes interesting for customs to look at this data. Customs can use this for their risk management. Now, the reason why private companies are willing to share this data on a voluntary basis then with customs is because in return they get the benefits that are oftentimes associated with an AEO, or Authorized Economic Operator Program, meaning faster clearance, meaning fewer inspections, and also, well, customs does produce some data themselves. When customs releases a container, when customs selects a container, that is information that of course has impacts on the other actors in the supply chain. So customs is also asked in this scenario to share some data back. Of course, we're not talking about confidential data, but many of the notifications or status updates can be shared with any further risk. We've had a few very comprehensive pilots in Saudi Arabia where we uploaded all the documentation pertaining to one shipment and had the Saudi Arabian as well as Dutch administrations look at the shipment on TRADELENS. I can also tell you, it's not on the slide here, but I can tell you that the Chinese customs authorities, the ones in Shanghai, they have actually a few weeks ago completed their integration with TRADELENS and are now also actively receiving that data. Now, being here in Russia, of course, there's also another great cooperation that I can mention, and that's also why my colleague Andrei Krupiatnikov from Maersk is here with me. Because on the 5th of June we've signed a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Transport here in Russia and also with Maersk as Mosvia Sputnik pertaining to the establishment of a pilot zone here in Russia. And the aim of this pilot zone is to bring TRADELENS and the technology here to Russia and help the Russian ecosystem to digitize and to develop and to also work together in a more efficient way. So I would ask Andrei to perhaps share a few words on how this Russian segment and how this Russian pilot zone is going to look like and also where we are in the process.